Here is an aircraft that can carry nearly 500 people across an ocean at 600 miles per hour. It weighs close to 1 million pounds at takeoff. It burns fuel at a rate that would drain a typical backyard swimming pool every few minutes. And yet, with all of that raw industrial power, it flies at essentially the same speed as airplanes did in 1958. Not faster, not even marginally faster, exactly the same. The question is not how aviation achieved this. The question is why, after 7 decades of relentless technological progress in nearly every other field, nobody tried harder to go faster. Or rather, why the ones who did try were punished for it. To understand this, you have to go back to a moment when the aviation industry genuinely believed speed was the future. In the late 1950s, the jet age had just arrived, and it arrived violently. The Boeing 707 compressed a transatlantic crossing from days aboard a ship to a matter of hours. The psychological impact was staggering. If jets had already compressed time so dramatically, what would supersonic jets do? Engineers and visionaries, and no small number of government ministers, looked at that trajectory and drew what seemed like an obvious line. The next generation of aircraft would fly at twice the speed of sound, maybe 3 times. The future would be fast. France and Britain made that bet official in 1962, signing the treaty that created Concorde. The Soviet Union launched its own program, the Tupolev Tu-144. The United States Congress funded a Boeing supersonic transport study. The logic was seductive. Whoever owned supersonic travel would own the premium end of aviation. Business travelers and the wealthy would pay enormous premiums to halve the crossing time. Airlines would compete for the prestige. Nations would demonstrate technological supremacy in the sky. What none of these calculations fully accounted for was physics. Not the physics of breaking the sound barrier that had already been solved. The deeper physics of what happens when you insist on going faster than sound inside an atmosphere that does not want you to. The problem begins at approximately Mach 0.85, which is right around the speed that modern airliners cruise today. As an aircraft approaches the speed of sound, air molecules in front of it cannot move out of the way fast enough. They compress. This compression creates a phenomenon called wave drag, a form of aerodynamic resistance that rises not gradually but exponentially as you approach Mach 1. Fighting wave drag demands exponentially more fuel. More fuel means more weight. More weight means even more fuel to carry it. The engineers call this the tyranny of the drag curve, and it is unforgiving. Concorde's designers solved this, brilliantly and expensively, by building an aircraft that flew at Mach 2, well beyond the drag peak, at altitudes above 60,000 feet, where the thin air reduced friction. It worked. Concorde genuinely flew at twice the speed of sound and carried passengers across the Atlantic in 3.5 hours. But the cost of that solution was extraordinary. Concorde burned nearly as much fuel per seat as a Boeing 747 that was simultaneously carrying 4 times as many people. The economics were not merely challenging, they were structurally impossible to justify unless ticket prices were set at levels that excluded virtually every traveler on Earth, except the very wealthy. When the oil shocks of the 1970s doubled and then tripled fuel prices, the business case did not just weaken, it evaporated. Meanwhile, the subsonic world was making a quieter, more methodical discovery. Engineers working on the 747, and later the wide-body generation of airliners, found something counterintuitive in the data. There was a narrow band of speed between roughly Mach 0.82 and Mach 0.86, where a well-designed wing could produce extraordinary lift with relatively modest drag. The fuel efficiency in this range was dramatically better than anything achievable at supersonic speeds, and meaningfully better than slower subsonic speeds too. The atmosphere had its own preferred velocity, and it happened to align almost exactly with where jet engines operated most efficiently. This confluence was not an accident. It was the result of a design revolution called the supercritical wing, developed largely through NASA research in the 1960s and 70s. A conventional wing, shaped like a classic teardrop in cross-section, would begin to generate shock waves on its upper surface well before the aircraft itself reached Mach 1. These local shock waves created drag and, more dangerously, unpredictable handling. The supercritical wing, flatter on top, more curved below, delayed this effect, pushing the efficient cruise window higher and making that Mach 0.82 to 0.86 range not just acceptable but optimal. Boeing incorporated refined versions into the 757 and 767. Airbus built its entire A320 family around the same principle. The result was that modern jet airliners locked into this speed range not because of timidity or lack of ambition, but because physics itself placed the efficiency peak there. Going faster meant climbing a wall of exponentially rising fuel consumption. Going slower meant leaving efficiency gains on the table. The airlines discovered, through billions of dollars of operational data, that the cruelest enemy of profitability in aviation is not competition or regulation. It is fuel burn. A 1% improvement in fuel efficiency across a fleet of 200 aircraft compounds into hundreds of millions of dollars over a decade. Speed, measured in the extra 15 or 20 minutes saved on a medium-haul route by flying marginally faster, compounded into almost nothing. There were attempts to escape this logic. Boeing explored a sonic cruiser concept in the early 2000s that would fly at Mach 0.98, just beneath the sound barrier, theoretically cutting travel times by about 15 to 20%. Airlines studied it seriously. Then the September 11th attacks reshaped the industry's financial picture overnight, and when Boeing went back to its airline customers and asked whether they wanted faster or more fuel efficient, the answer was unanimous. The Sonic Cruiser became the 787 Dreamliner, a subsonic aircraft, optimized entirely for efficiency rather than speed. What makes this story genuinely instructive is the way it inverts the usual narrative of technological progress. We expect that industries advance by making things faster, more powerful, more extreme. Aviation did that, briefly and spectacularly, and found the wall. The deeper achievement, the one that connects a 1960 Boeing 707 to a 2024 Airbus A350 at nearly identical cruising speeds, was learning to do more inside a fixed constraint rather than breaking through it. The aircraft became quieter, safer, more fuel efficient, and capable of flying further. The speed stayed the same because the speed was already, in a very real sense, exactly right. The lesson Concorde taught, written in years of operating losses and ultimately in the silence of a grounded fleet, was that passengers do not experience physics abstractly. They experience it as a ticket price. And the physics of supersonic flight, for all its elegance, has never resolved that equation. Modern aviation is not flying at 600 miles per hour because engineers lacked imagination. It is flying at 600 miles per hour because the atmosphere, the fuel, the economics, and the geometry of a supercritical wing all arrived at the same answer. And that answer has proven, over 60 years of global aviation, to be a deeper kind of genius than the sound barrier ever was.